Starfish dissection in 7th grade and this guy in my class ate the starfish. School counselors/nurses of Reddit, what is the most embarrassing or WTF reason a kid has ended up in your office? Middle school counselor here. Not really WTF, but a 7th grader came to see me in tears because she thought she might be pregnant. After some discussion, I realized that she had given a hand job and thought she could get pregnant from getting semen on her hands. We have a student, 1st grade, who poops his pants on purpose when he wants to go home. About once a week. When I was in 2nd grade, a boy held a pencil point up on my chair, and I sat on it. It traveled through my jeans and underwear without any damage and stuck firmly in my little butt cheek. On this day, we happened to have a substitute teacher, and when I started crying, she took me into the in-classroom restroom and looked at my butt, informed me that the tip of the pencil was stuck in there, and I took off running and crying down the hall. I turned a corner and the janitor, Ralph, called out, "Do you have a pass?" To which I replied, "There's a pencil stuck in my butt." Then I continued down the hall to the nurse's office. The school nurse, Sherry, was a very sweet lady. She calmed me down, called my mom to ask for permission to touch my butt, and plucked it out. I got to go home for the day. I consider it a win. A boy in my 7th grade class snorted a line of sugar he poured from a pixie stick. He promptly got a severe nosebleed that would not stop and he had to go to the nurse's office and he was there until his mom could pick him up and take him home. I put my hand through a window in high school trying to kill a bug on the window. When I got to the nurse she was like, "Sweet. Nothing like this ever happens." We had about 5 kids, 5th graders, come in one day after lunch because one of the other kids brought a habanero pepper and convinced them all to try it. You'd think they would learn after the first one did it. Nope. I worked at a summer camp, and apparently, they had to stop selling rabbit pelts in the gift shop because boys would buy them, masturbate with them, not clean them up. So the cum would get the fur all stiff and pointy, try and use it again the next night and scratch up their dicks and have to go to the nurse. When I was in grade 9 we were reenacting battles from wars with marshmallow ammunition in the schoolyard and somebody whipped a marshmallow right into my open eye. This sounds like the wimpiest injury ever, and it really was, but it hurt and I couldn't open my eye or see. I had to go to the nurse and explain that the black eye I was getting was from a marshmallow and she had to do like an eye rinse to get out all the powdery sugar. She even called my mom and they just laughed at me. My mom is a school nurse. One day, after the school day ended, she was about to leave when someone came to get her about an emergency. A student needed something from his locker in a sports locker room. The door was locked. He decided he would crawl into the ceiling, over the door, over the locker room, drop down from the ceiling, get what he needed, and crawl back out through the ceiling. The kid fell through the ceiling before he could make it inside the locker room. We were dissecting rats in 9th grade and bet a kid that he wouldn't eat the rat's balls for $30. He did. He had to be taken to the hospital to get his stomach pumped because the rat's balls were covered in formaldehyde. I got sent to the nurse once for getting quarters stuck up my nose. Some kid bet me that I couldn't fit 3 quarters up my nose. He was wrong. Never considered how I'd get them out. One winter in junior high, my classmates engaged in running across a frozen pond for kicks and giggles. One of them decided he would run across the barefoot, and luckily for him, the ice decided to break under his bare soles. Needless to say, there were cuts and blood all over, and since our school's nurse was on lunch break, our maths teacher had to carry him to a nearby school where they could tend to him. Our art room was directly above the shop room, both on an exterior corner of the school. For some reason, the shop exhaust tube was turned upside down one day, making it vent directly into the art room's intake. The counselors were perplexed when they had a room full of sick and loopy students. They accused us of all getting high, and we were all sent back to the art room, until even the teacher presented with the same symptoms. I think all we did was sit outside for a bit, then we all continued on with our day in other classrooms. I'll throw myself in here, not a nurse but the embarrassing kid. I grew up with a dairy allergy, not lactose intolerance, like an actual allergy where I was told that my throat would close and eyes swell up, or it did a couple of times when I was much younger. I was pretty vigilant about not eating dairy so I don't have an actual memory of a reaction, well, The second day of my freshman year, I bought a sub and checked it for cheese, ate half of it before I realized there was white Swiss on it. I freaked out and went to the office and told them. They called an ambulance and my parents rushed there. And it turns out I've definitely grown out of the allergy. 10 years later and my friends still harass me about the time I got scared by a sandwich and called an ambulance. Still embarrassed about it every time. A guy in one of my HS Chem classes tried sneaking some sodium, if I remember right, out of the classroom. Unfortunately, he decided he would hide it in a paper towel in his crotch. He eventually sweated enough to activate it and ended up burning his crotch pretty badly. School had to call an ambulance. In my high school Gen Chem lab, we had about 10 students, one of whom got his fingers stuck in a wooden test tube rack. He hid that hand behind his back for a good amount of time before our lab teacher noticed and asked why he was doing so. He ended up having to have the jewelry teacher in the classroom next door saw it off. Well, when I was in year 9, a student tried to kill himself in and during a lesson, this was a serious attempt, by strangling himself with his own hands. In front of the teachers and all of us, leaving us wondering WTF he was doing. Well, I was a student. One time I had hickeys and the nurse/police thought I was getting abused. I called my parents and everything. I had a friend who cut himself pretty deep with scissors. He proceeded to try to see how many pieces of .7 lead he could stick into his body. He got about halfway through one piece when it broke inside him and he had excruciating pain which he described as a burning and stinging. We were only in middle school, and he went to the school nurse who tried to squeeze it out of him and then just assumed it had entered the bloodstream and left him alone. One time in 6th grade I was playing with scissors in my art class and cut my bottom lip. I put my hand to my lip instantly out of fear and it was covered with blood. I walked up to the teacher, who was in the process of scolding some kid for doing something stupid with the art supplies, and when he turned to me he was so frustrated he said, "You better be bleeding." I showed him my lip, he just shook his head and said go to the nurse. I still have a little U-shaped scar on the bottom of my bottom lip from that incident. We dissected a pig in biology in high school and a guy stuck his scalpel up its throat and was walking around the classroom quoting lines from Lord of the Flies. Needless to say, he got suspended for it. In 2nd grade I went to the nurse's office with a good-sized hole in my ear. I fell while running to the bathroom and slammed my head into the corner of a filing cabinet. The nurse had no idea what to do, so she put dry gauze on the hole. Later it became very apparent that that was a bad idea. I have one involving both counselors and nurses. I have very well documented allergies to things like peanuts and pet dander and dust mites and fabric softener and anything that flowers, so, basically, I am always having some kind of allergic reaction. My school had a zero-tolerance policy, so I had to go to the nurse and ask politely for my allergy medication on the relatively frequent occasions I would break out in painful hives. After realizing I was doing this, the school counselor started intercepting me to interrogate me about why I was trying to get out of class, what was really bothering me, and if I had found some clever new way to get high. The phrase, "No, really, look at these nasty hives all over my arms" meant nothing to her. She eventually called my allergist to ask him hypothetically if it was possible for me to have reactions this frequently, then called my parents and suggested they consider taking me to a psychologist because it might be psychosomatic. It wasn't. My immune system is just shit. I was sent to detention, which inevitably also meant seeing the counselor for misbehaving in grade 7. My crime? I didn't stand up when I was told to. I was in a wheelchair. The counselor thought I was lying when I got to his office when I told him what happened, so kept me on detention. I got home, told my mom, she lawyered up and had him write a letter that scared the shit out of the principal so much I never saw that teacher or the counselor ever again. I was a school nurse. The saddest ones are the ones that have to be sent to my office, then home, repeatedly for head lice. The parents often don't give a shit. Sometimes the only solution is to have the kids shave their heads. Those kids are so embarrassed. I once got one of those rubber earbud pieces stuck in my ear in high school. I tried fishing it out with my fingers, a pencil, etc., but it was lodged pretty tight, so finally I said fuck it and went to the nurse. Since she knew that I was going to music school for college/pursuing music, She didn't want to touch it because if something went wrong she didn't want to be responsible for damaging my hearing. So, she gave me the name of an ENT doctor and called my mother to come to pick me up. The ENT doctor went in with tweezers and plucked it right out. Kind of a waste of time, but I got to miss most of a day of classes for it, so it was all good. In 5th grade, a friend of mine said his whiteout smelled like blueberries from being next to a blueberry-scented eraser. After I smell it I passed it to another friend to smell it. That said friend complained about a headache from sniffing whiteout, and next thing I knew I was suspended for 2 days and I needed to write an essay explaining why I shouldn't inhale or huff whiteout because it could lead to hard drugs. In my senior year of high school, I sliced one of my fingers, left ring, on the soft underside, almost in half lengthwise with an X-Acto blade moments after my art teacher warned us to be careful because 2 freshmen accidentally stabbed each other in the butt first period. I sat there for an hour trying to secretly stem the bleeding with the paper towel help of the friends in my desk group. When I finally admitted what I'd done, the school nurse said she couldn't help me and was about to call 911 for an ambulance, which I thought would be a spectacular waste of a couple of $1,000s, so I drove myself. But because I didn't take an ambulance, I wasn't admitted right away and sat there bleeding for another 3 hours. Lost a lot of blood and got 11 stitches, still have a scar. Well, I feel like this fits here somewhat, so I will throw it in. I took a lot of art classes in high school, but so did a lot of assholes who just wanted an easy A. One such asshole sat across from me, was well known for being a troublemaker, and decided one day it would be cool to throw an X-Acto knife at me. It stuck in my leg. There was only one nurse for 3 schools in the district. Needless to say, I dealt with it myself. I once got sent to the principal in 5th grade because I went to the nurse after hurting my knee in a gym, but the teachers thought that I was there to cheer on a friend who had gotten into a fight that I didn't even know happened. Turns out my principal thought that she knew everything about every individual kid because she took a class about child development. The same principal also accused me of insubordination because I was wearing the same coat as the offender, found out it wasn't me, and still gave me a detention. My principal was a power-tripping cunt, who got me a ridiculous number of detentions and counselor trips for an elementary school student. Well, the stupid, male, kid here, in preschool when I was around 4 I told the teachers I had PMS. They thought that shit was great. They made me call my mom and tell her while they all stood around laughing. Turns out I had seen some commercials about some PMS relief pill and asked my mother what PMS was. She told me it was when you get headaches, your stomach hurts and you don't feel good. Well, my head ached, my stomach hurt, and I didn't feel good. So obviously, PMS. I got sent to the school counselor for playing ankles with my buddy. For those of you that don't know, the game of ankles consists of 2 simple rules. 1. Pull your pants down to your ankles. 2. Whoever pulls their pants up first loses. I have never seen a more confused look on my principal's face than when he caught us, and to top it all off I lost. My son's middle school had a really skittish nurse. I am not sure what her qualifications were, but she called for an ambulance about twice a week. My son is asthmatic and had a complicated regimen back then. This woman just couldn't handle it for some reason, so we had to have my son take his meds right before and right after school, and he had to smuggle in his inhaler. But he never got flack for that until the end of his 2nd year there. One day, he hit his head in the shop class. Not bad, but they sent him to the nurse. She calls me at work and says I had to pick him up. I told her to call my wife, who worked from home and was 5 minutes away. She couldn't process that and said no, I had to pick him up. I said that was silly, I was at least an hour away, and why my wife was primary contact. She said she didn't answer the phone. I sent an IM to my wife, and she said she hadn't gotten a call. So she called the school. The nurse insists that if I am anything of a responsible father, I was to be there in 10 minutes or she's sending my son to the hospital. WTF? I am an hour away. My wife can be there in 5 minutes. So my wife gets through, and the nurse speaks to her. I forgot what led to this, but my wife ends up in a fight with the nurse who refuses to tell her about why her son was being sent to a hospital. So my wife says she'll be there in 5 minutes to sort it all out. The nurse considers this a threat to her life and calls the cops. So my wife is met at the school nurse's office by the police. And EMTs because the nurse called an ambulance. During this, an EMT calls me because the nurse is dealing with my wife and the cops. He says my son is fine, just a little freaked out because some woman claiming to be my ex-wife or something is being accused of threatening bodily harm to the nurse. In the end, no one was arrested, and my wife sent my son back to class. My wife said the nurse was so crazy, the cops pretty much took my wife's side right away. But she was no longer allowed on school grounds because the vice principal was also crazy and scared of my wife. The next time my son was in the nurse's office, he was caught with his prescribed inhaler. I had to come to pick it up right away because it was an unauthorized potential explosive contaminant. I got the call walking my dog, and the school was 5 minutes away, so I just went right over. Oh man, the second that nurse saw my Pekingese, she flipped the fuck out. Said it was a dirty dog, and some kid allergic to dogs could die, and wow. She wouldn't even get near me and had an office aide hand me the inhaler. That woman was crazy. Thank you for watching Reddit Space. Please subscribe if you love these Reddit stories.